I am Dave from Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site, and you are the audience. We're wrapping up our third Thursday lecture series with this pretty awesome presentation. Derrick Pratt is the museum educator at the Erie Canal Museum in downtown Syracuse, New York. He's the former director of programs at the Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum, and he obtained his BA in social studies education from SUNY Cortland and a master's in museum studies from Syracuse University. Derrick brings the Erie Canal Museum outside and beyond the museum walls to areas all over New York with innovative and unique programs. Some include beer and bicycles. So please join me in welcoming the star of Cooking on the Canals on the YouTube channel, Derrick Pratt.
Wow, thank you for the great intro, David. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me tonight. Glad we could make it. And, you were saying before we started here, can't call it a winter program, but the canal doesn't open for another 12 hours. So still winter maintenance season, I dare say, on the canal system. So there we go. Bending the rules slightly here, season-wise. But anyway, thanks for having me. And we are going to look at, there's no place like home, the Syracuse Weighlock Building. I, of course, as a lifelong resident of Chittenango, have to make a Wizard of Oz reference somewhere. So there's that. But what is the Syracuse Weighlock Building? Well, here it is. Today, there we go, along with our excellent mule and mule driver statue. There is the Syracuse Weighlock, most of it that isn't covered up by mule parts. It is the only remaining weighlock along the Erie Canal corridor. There were 7, and we're going to talk all about them in a little bit. But we're going to do a real deep dive tonight on this building. And to talk about this building, we're going to have to go back to before it was built, to the early days of the canal, because this weighlock is actually the 4th weighlock that Syracuse has had. Also, I would like to right now give a special shout out to Craig Williams. His master's thesis is my primary source for a lot of this stuff. It's almost all you need to know about the Weighlock Building. It's an invaluable resource for us at the museum. But anyway, we're going to focus in here at the intersection of the Erie and Oswego canals. But even before that, so the canal, they start digging it 1817 in Rome, New York, focusing on the middle section first. So the 96 miles between the Mohawk River and the Seneca River, connecting Montezuma and ultimately Utica. And that section is going to be completed in 1820. That is the first full season of navigation on New York's canals. Remember, it's only going those 96 miles. And so the state invested in the canal project. They were the funders of it. So they were already kind of amassing debts, and they needed to figure out a way to pay for that. And what the state settled on was tolls on the use of the canal. So making the people who use the canals, who benefited from its easy and improved transportation the most, pay for that transportation system rather than raise taxes all across the state. So they need to start collecting tolls, which they do almost right away. July 1st, 1820 is when they will start collecting tolls on the canal. So you got about 2 months of free canal use in May and June of 1820. But after that, free rides are over. 5 toll collecting stations are established this year. One at the western terminus in Montezuma, one at the eastern terminus, Utica, also in Rome, Canastota, and another right where we've got circled here at the intersection of the Erie Canal and what was then just a 1.5 mile long side cut up to Salina and Syracuse's salt fields. Well, Salina's salt fields. Syracuse itself was a relatively small village. And appointed the toll collector in Syracuse is, at the time, its most notable resident, Joshua Foreman. He is kind of called the founder of Syracuse, though he himself did not found it. He is the real major promoter of the city. In 1808, he actually proposes a bill to survey the route of the canal. It's really the first of a possible canal. It's really the first piece of legislation in what will eventually develop into the Erie Canal. But anyway, he is going to set up his toll collecting booth. They do not have weighlocks yet. Here on this little island that is formed, this is a map from 1834. So I think it might be a little bit more developed, or Goose Island might be a tad bit smaller. But Foreman sets up his little toll house on Goose Island, and he's paid $250 annually for this position. And that is the highest paid of the 5 toll collectors in 1820, and it makes sense. We're going to see that the Syracuse Weighlock is the busiest, and I would suspect even in 1820, Syracuse was the busiest because it had this established industry of salt already to the north. It's obviously nothing that it's going to become, but salt is a crucial good in funding the canal through tolls. And from the Onondaga Register, the newspaper at the time, they have reports of the salt industry really taking off as soon as the canal goes through. Anyway, Foreman's using what a lot of people still sometimes I find associate with how boats were weighed. The idea that you would have had straps on the front of your boat, kind of telling you how low in the water it was riding, and therefore you could kind of calculate how much water it was displacing, and then assign a value to it. But that's a pretty imperfect system, not super trustworthy. You could scam that fairly well depending on where you put goods in the boat, from what I understand. So they move on to a new system, a weiglock. So a weiglock functions the same way as a lock, sort of, except it weighs boats rather than changes elevation. You bring a boat into a chamber, water is drained out of it, and then, well, there's different ways it works. In 1824, they introduce a hydrostatic weiglock. I have read and reread this section of Craig's thesis about how a hydrostatic lock worked. Don't fully understand it, but it seems like there was another chamber. The chamber gets sealed off. They drain the water into a separate chamber and were able to determine how much water was displaced by the boat, and therefore you can calculate a toll. However, this is not the most efficient system. I imagine canalers did not find it to be the most trustworthy of systems. They probably were not reading Archimedes much while riding on their boats or driving mules. So that is quickly replaced in 1828 by a weiglock with a scale. So this is a lot easier to explain. You drain out the weigh chamber. and the boat will rest on a large cradle that connects to a scale. And you would weigh your boat at the beginning of the season, empty, that's sort of a tare weight. Then you come back in later in the season, laden with goods, and they can easily calculate how much your boat weighs. With that in it, do some quick math, and boom, you know how much to charge someone in tolls. Big issue with this waylock, unlike locks on the canal, which were constructed of stone, for some reason they made the decision to build the 1828 waylock out of wood. It quickly starts to degrade. So in 1834, when this map is actually made, they build a new waylock out of stone. I should also point out that all three of these waylocks are where this circle is. You can see coming off of the Oswego Canal, this sort of channel running in. So the original three Syracuse waylocks were located here at the corner of the Oswego Canal and what was then Foot Street would eventually be renamed to James Street. You would have had to go under a bridge and stuff. It always perplexes me as to why they chose this location, because it does not seem super convenient. But nonetheless, it is there. Also, the 1834 waylock is the first one we know of to have an accompanying building. Previously, the waylocks, to our knowledge, had just been the waylock, the way chamber part had the hydrostatic or normal scales in there, and I imagine the toll collectors would have hung out in something similar to a lock vendor shanty that we have now, or probably a bit more complex than that because they do have some important documents they need to have and whatnot. But anyway, 1834, they get a building. However, there is a big problem. That waylock in 1834 has a 35-ton scale installed in it. It is built to the specifications of boats in its day, 1834. So it's going to be 85 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. But only 2 years after that waylock is built, the enlargement of the canal is authorized to 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep. And if you know where the boats are going after that, boats are going to be able to become much, much larger and carry a lot more weight. You're going to have boats going from carrying 35 tons to about 200 tons of goods during the enlargement period. So with the enlargement, this waylock is going to quickly be obsolete. However, in 1837, just a year after the enlargement process begins, America faces the aptly named Panic of 1837, a major economic crisis in the country, which puts a major damper in the canal building age. Several states go bankrupt due to their canal building projects. New York's kind of teetering on the edge. In 1842, they're going to pass the stop and tax law, which says you have to stop building new and large sections of the canal until you can tax enough money to actually pay for the enlargement process. So it's a really long and drawn out process. But as the boats are getting bigger and as the state needs money to pay for these improvements to the canal, they really need waylocks that can accommodate these larger boats. And so in 1848, they're going to come to the decision that they need a new waylock in Syracuse. And it's going to be located a bit to the south of here. I'm going to highlight right over here. You'll see this basin here. This is important to our story. So this basin was built. The intent was it would kind of be a wide waters of sorts. You could bring your boat in Syracuse over in there. You could also there's going to be what's called Market Hall is built at the southern end of the basin. This is intended to be a major marketplace for the city to compete with what's going on over here, a bit to the west in Clinton Square, Hanover Square, the first kind of commercial district of the city. However, Market Hall really does not catch on. Eventually, the village of Syracuse, which is growing exponentially, their offices also start to. Initially, they rent out the top floor of Market Hall and eventually head down to the second floor of this now largely abandoned marketplace. And Market Hall becomes City Hall when Syracuse incorporates as a city in the 1840s. So that's there. The Weighlock Building is going to be located right here at the intersection of the Oswego and Erie Canal. You're going to have that nice basin there to kind of give some extra room for boats to get into the Weighlock. But, oops, here we go. There we see it at that location. I was just highlighting. Here is the Oswego Canal, and the Erie is right there. There it is in winter. So, like I said, at the intersection of those, a number of businesses had called this location home before there, and so the museum is housed in both the Weighlock Building and bit to the east. So where these buildings are, our visitor center takes up a few of those. So in those locations, the first business that we know of being located here in 1824, that was a grocery store, but also a storehouse is going to exist on this property, a foundry, a lumber yard, and a hat business. I am not sure what they were doing exactly with hats, making them, selling them, looking at hats. Who knows? Probably not that last one. But a hat business is there. And finally, though, as I said, in 1848, the state contracts out to build a new Weighlock there. In 1848, on April 15th, 1848, a man by the name of Silas Ball, contractor out of Rochester, is contracted, and then he appears to really do not a lot. So he is replaced by the state in September by Cason and Lewis are contracted to build a Weighlock that is 110 feet long and 18 feet wide, big enough to accommodate those new, larger boats. But that is just for the Weighlock. So the section inside the weigh chamber, part that weighs the boats, the building, our iconic Greek Revival building of brick, that is contracted out to William Champlin, James Thorne, and Edward Fuller, who take the contract. Craig was able to track down like their expense accounts and everything, and it came out that it cost $8,283.37 to construct the physical Weighlock building. Don't have estimates on the Weighlock itself, though. They are also going to get in touch with a person canal enthusiasts know well, mostly for his bridge designs, but he also designs a number of Weighlock scales, and that is Squire Whipple. So Whipple is going to design a scale. He also designs a few other scales. I know he does the West Troy or Watervliet Weighlock's scale, and that scale is rated to hold about 400 tons. So we went from a 35-ton scale in the previous Weighlock to 400 tons. And on July 2nd, 1850, so only about a year and a half after they really start getting to work on this Weighlock, the Weighlock building is open for business, and we still celebrate July 22nd as the museum's birthday every year. What happened to the old Weighlock, you might ask? Well, it was sold in 1856 for $80, which doesn't seem like a ton of money for kind of downtown property in this growing city. But as we are going to see, political graft is rampant when it comes to Weighlocks. So I am curious if that had anything to do with it. So that said, let's talk about working at the Weighlock. A bunch of people worked in the Weighlock, and they were separated by two. What they did kind of depended on which floor you were on. There were first and second floor. The second floor was kind of more high status jobs, I would say, while the first floor, as we're going to see, they're the ones who are the boots on the ground, making the canal function on a day-to-day basis. The top floor, so the second floor is more the making sure the canal functions overall. There aren't a lot of qualifications, it seems like, to work most positions in the Weighlock. We will talk about, there is a major exception to that, but few qualifications. Most people employed at the Weighlock are locals. There is a high turnover within the workers, and all of that kind of owes itself largely to political patronage. Yeah, I am a sucker for political patronage and corruption on the canal, so we're going to talk about that. Kind of, if you worked in the canal building, in the Weighlock building, largely depended on who you were voting for. People would come into office. This is the height of the spoil system, first pioneered by the little magician of Kinderhook, New York's own Martin Van Buren. But here in the background, we see actually a political cartoon from the year the canal was opened. So this is national politics. Gamecock and the Goose. That's General Winfield Scott, who was the Whig nominee for president, and Franklin Pierce, the Democratic nominee. National politics played far less of a role than state politics, though, in who got jobs at the canal. But this is just a fun image. I know Scott's nickname was Old Fuss and Feathers, so that kind of explains the rooster imagery. Not 100% sure about the goose for Franklin Pierce, but nonetheless, figured I'd share that one. So let's look at some of those positions. Who was working there? On the second floor, we'll start up there. You've got the Canal Commissioner. Those of you who are, and I would like to remind you that the second floor of the Weighlock building would have had far less room than it does today if you go to the Weighlock Building. This picture on the left, you actually see when they were renovating the upstairs, the second floor of the Weighlock Building to accommodate that new office space that was made. Remember, the scale mechanism was taking up a lot of what is now the present exhibition temporary exhibit gallery. But I figured I'd show you what it looked like when they were changing up the second floor. But prior to that, people working on the second floor, you had the Canal Commissioner. He was not working there full time. So people who've been around the canal for a while, we often think of canal commissioners in association with the original Canal Commission that kind of got the canal built and oversaw its construction. By the time that the Weighlock was going into operation, though, that Canal Commission had been replaced by the Canal Board, which consisted of the Lieutenant Governor, the Comptroller, the State Treasurer, and then 3 appointed Canal Commissioners, 1 for each division, the Central, Middle, and Eastern divisions. And those Canal Commissioners were required to tour. They worked full-time in Albany, but they were required once a month to tour their division. And Syracuse is right smack dab in the middle of the Middle Division. It's kind of the headquarters of the Middle Division, I would say. And so the Canal Commissioner is working out of the second floor of the Weighlock building a lot, as is his assistant commissioner. And each Canal Commissioner was appointed to a 3-year term. This is a big job in the political patronage network. The people getting appointed to these 3-year spots, they now have the power to hire canal workers across that section, hire contractors for that section, and so forth. So they've got the power of giving out jobs and giving out money for an entire section of the state. That is a lot of votes you can buy. So it is a very important position in the political patronage network of the time. I said, though, there was one notable exception to the needing few qualifications, and that is the next position they call the second floor home. That would be the engineers. So the canal, major engineering project, it needed a lot of engineers to work on it. And there's a number of different types of engineers who worked on the canal. There's the state engineer. That is an appointed position. Again, one of those really influential appointed positions where you get to appoint more people. Also based out of Albany, but the state engineer was required to make a yearly inspection of the of the canal. So on his tour, would have no doubt been in the building, would have been going back and forth, I'm sure, on the canal at other times as well. If you're the state engineer, the Erie Canal is occupying a lot of your time, undoubtedly. So he would have used the office space up there once in a while. But really, the most important engineer full-time here at the Weighlock Building is the division engineer, headquartered right here in Syracuse. There's also resident engineers, so they're assigned a few stretches. Sorry, my dog's biting my foot right now and distracting me a touch. But so they're assigned a few miles. They're kind of the boots on the ground for the engineering corps. They got to make sure that, these couple of locks function, culverts are in working order, berm banks aren't about to, collapse or anything. Yeah, and they will also have a number of assistants. The most engineers working in the building, it's believed, during the kind of this part of the canal era when it was a functioning waylock would have been right around the 1850s. This is when the canal is finishing up the enlargement process over that decade, so you would have needed the most engineers. Sorry, one second. Sorry, my foot was being gnawed off. Where was I? Yeah, so right at during that enlargement process, that's when probably the most engineers would have been needed in the building. During kind of the general operations afterwards, less needed. Thank you. Yes, I'll end up like Governor Morris. Chance, but one person I'd like to highlight who we've now figured out almost definitely working. There's a couple interesting engineers and some that buck the trend of that high turnover in the waylock, because again, to be an engineer, you need some qualifications. You need to actually know how to engineer. We'll see some of the other jobs in the Weighlock building are less highly skilled, but in our collections, we have the diaries of David Earl Whitford, who began his career on the canal in the 1840s. And he served in this building undoubtedly for many of his long and storied years on the canal. He retires in the 1900s as the longest tenured canal engineer. You may be familiar with his son's work as well. Noble Whitford wrote a very influential history of the canal and himself became a notable engineer on the canal. Also working in the Weighlock would have been Garnett Douglas Baltimore. Baltimore worked on the canals early 1870s. He is the first Black graduate of the RPI School of Engineering, and he has had a profound effect on the canal corridor in a number of ways, including developing mudlock, which is still visible today here in central New York at Onondaga Lake Park. And he then became a civil engineer in Troy, designing a number of their parks out there. We actually did a lunchtime lecture with Suzanne Spellin about his life. It's fascinating. Anyway, moving on. The other position in the upstairs would be the superintendent of repairs. So this is a far less skilled position. The superintendent of repairs job is, as the name implies, to repair stuff on the canal, make sure stuff gets repaired. For instance, at 1861, the culvert that drained the Weighlock into Onondaga Creek, that collapsed. So superintendent of repairs would have been responsible for making sure that got fixed, and number of other things that need to be fixed. The superintendent of repairs job, kind of like the resident engineers, less. Sorry, I might actually lose my foot here tonight. Here, she'll join us for this. Like the resident engineer, only assigned a few miles, would have only gone out to Fayetteville, which is about 10 miles away from Syracuse. Yeah, and superintendent of repairs was a far less skilled position than being an engineer. Takes a lot less work to call up a contractor to fix a wall. So that is a highly political appointment as well. And again, it's an important one because You're calling up contractors. You're handing out money. You're hiring workers to repair sections of the canal. And getting people jobs is how you get votes. Anyway, moving on to the first floor and the general operations of the Weighlock. Here we see the only known picture of a boat in the Weighlock building. In the weigh chamber, you can kind of see the scale apparatus here hanging down from the ceiling. I already explained how we weighed boats and collected tolls, but who was actually doing that? Who was collecting those tolls? Well, it was the aptly named collector. Collector's a unique position. Their job is to ask people for money and make sure that they pay correctly, that they're telling truth about what they're carrying in their boat, that sort of thing. And in fact, the collector is invested with the power to put people under oath regarding what they're carrying, how much they're carrying, that sort of thing. So it's a powerful position, but it's also one that does not require loads of skill. So this is one where we see a lot of political patronage and that lack of qualifications. Craig had found that collectors had jobs that included owning a liquor store, being a builder. I assume that means some sort of contractor, which would make sense. Contracting and being involved in politics often went hand in hand. We had clerks, railroad agents, lots of newspaper men end up as collectors. Again, probably not an accident. They undoubtedly wrote glowing articles and editorials about certain political parties and their candidates, and also a number of merchants end up here. So also, these collectors are required to deposit the money they collect in tolls in local banks. This is to help stimulate the growing banking industry within New York. You have to remember, when the Erie Canal first opens up, not a lot of banks up in places like Syracuse. So the state wants to encourage their growth. So Weighlock's going to be depositing its money in local banks. Also, lots of commerce is going on in Clinton Square. So as a result, I mean, you can kind of see why right in between the Weighlock Building and Clinton Square, you've got Hanover Square, which has, I think, still 8 visible former banks if you're in Hanover Square. Moving on, though, well, the collector also would have had several clerks working under him. So essentially, assistants in his duties. And again, they're going to be hired through political patronage as well. Most collectors at the other Weighlocks would have also served as boat inspectors. Again, we see their ability to put people under oath and stuff. They're trying to detect fraud. Syracuse, however, because it is the busiest Weighlock on the canal, ends up with its own boat inspector along with a collector. Yeah, these folks also, they just got to determine if someone's lying or not at times. So again, one with limited qualifications. We have music and grocery store owners among the people who end up as boat inspectors. An interesting account in Craig's thesis about one boat captain getting a $20 fine imposed on him from the boat inspector by trying to fake that tear weight at the beginning of the season, tried to make the boat heavier by putting barrels of water into his boat when it was supposed to be weighed at the beginning of the season. They caught him though, and yeah. lost $20 out of that. Then there is probably the most iconic position on the canal that is, or not on the canal, at the Weighlock. That is the Waymaster. As the name implies, they were the master of weighing stuff. Their job would have been to operate the scale and take the readings on it, I believe. Number of interesting folks serve as Waymasters in Syracuse. You can actually learn more about the Waymasters in Syracuse. Pamela Vittorio will be giving a lunchtime lecture at the Erie Canal Museum in July about various Waymasters she has done research on. But a few interesting ones. We've got Benjamin Higgins, who prior to working in the Weighlock was a daguerreotype artist, and who after working in the Weighlock ends up as a police commissioner for Syracuse. There's also didn't work in the Weighlock, the current Weighlock building itself, but one Waymaster who, if you come to the museum, you'll see a model kind of Waymaster based off of Parley Bassett, who was a teacher prior to becoming a Waymaster, and also a active member in the Syracuse's Unitarian Church, which was the home of Samuel J. May, one of the most prominent abolitionists in central New York. And we have a number of receipts in our collection of Parley Bassett helping to pay for Samuel May's salary at the Unitarian Church, which is pretty cool. And then the Waymaster also has a number of clerks helping him. I guess the most well-known one, the creator of one of my favorite, I don't know if it's an artifact technically, but features of the museum, a guy by the name of John J. Brintnall. He is hired in the early 1850s. It's 1859. Sorry, I forgot to write that part down. Brintnall is hired along with two other gentlemen from central New York to serve as clerks for the Waymaster, and we really know about him because he carved J.J. into the weigh chamber wall. And there is one Syracuse Standard article about him. His primary qualification for getting the job, it says, is that he was an Orthodox Democrat, as were the other two appointed with him. Evidently, it was a Republican newspaper. Yes, it was 1859. He was hired. Now that I think about it, yep. Because they said that was the only thing going against J.J. Brintnall, was that he was a Democrat, but they would recommend him otherwise. Let's talk a little about the operations of the Weighlock. I see I'm running a little long here. The Weighlock could take about 4 boats an hour, so it took about 15 minutes to empty and refill the boats. It doesn't seem like a lot, but you know, there's a pretty good rush going on. The Weighlock was a hopping and bopping place, especially in Syracuse, being one of the primary Weighlocks for kind of the two busiest canals in the system, the Oswego and the Erie. We have a number of accounts of people falling into the Weighlock. You know, it's operating 24 hours a day, so middle of the night, people don't notice where the steps are or something, fall into the weigh chamber. Usually this just winds up with some scrapes and bruises, you know, some wet clothes, that sort of thing. But tragically, on July 5th, 1886, when the boat, the Union, came in, so the way the Weighlock worked, you know, when when the water goes away, the tiller kind of had the possibility of moving about now that it is free from the water. And Mary Rushmore was knocked into the weigh chamber, was sucked into the vortex kind of created by the water leaving, and sadly drowned. That is the only known fatality we have in the Weighlock. But an interesting story nonetheless. Most people got out much better than that, though she is not the only person who would end up getting sucked into the Weighlock. Everyone else, however, was saved from what we can gather. In fact, on July 5th, 1866, another woman who was on the boat with her was also knocked into the weigh chamber, but she survived. The Weighlock got especially busy late in the season as canalers made their final rushes to try to get in before the canal froze. We have an account from November 23rd, 1860, of a 12 to 14 hour delay at the Weighlock as everyone tried to get their final loads weighed and ready to head to a canal port to winter, get their last bit of money. Also in 1860, possibly delaying the works more, Squire Whipple's scale had already gotten out of date by 1860. And in 1861, a new scale is built replacing it. That is the Sampson scale, which can hold an extra 150 tons, so 550 tons. The first boat to go through that is the Regulator of Corning. So that's a good reminder that the canal system at that time, far more extensive, hundreds more miles of canal at the time than there are now. So even Corning, New York, connected via canal. Later that year, the CH gauge is going to break the record for most goods carried by a boat, weighed on the scale, 275 tons of grain. The only issue with the Sampson scale is that it is too short. The cradle that the boats rest on, and 12 feet of boat hanging off of the edge. And if you have a boat carrying 275 tons of grain, you do not want it bowing too much, because I imagine that grain's gonna bend your boat. That could result in negative consequences for your boat. But that scale keeps functioning, mostly in good working order, until canal tolls are abolished in 1883 to continue to compete with railroads. So the Weighlock functions as a Weighlock for 33 years. But after the tolls, what happens? Well, boats still need to be weighed at the beginning of the season. Not 100% positive on why that is, but they did still have to get weighed. So scale still worked. You could still bring your boat in there. So at the beginning of the season, get your boat weighed there. It could serve as an emergency dry dock if the canal needed to be drained quickly. You could open up the Weighlock's culvert, help to drain that out. That's in case of something like a canal break, like what would happen in 1907 over Onondaga Creek, though as we'll see, probably wouldn't have served that function then, because some changes will have been made on the Weighlock by then. There we go. Like I said, 1903, Department of Public Works and Department of New York State Engineers are going to start moving into the building, and they are going to do some major renovations to the Weighlock in 1903. That's when it's believed our iconic tin walls were installed at the museum. If you come to the Weighlock, you'll see these gorgeous tin It's not exactly wallpaper, but it's sort of like wallpaper all over the place. That is installed, looks great. Also had a slight kind of fireproofing effect for the building. And then we saw that image earlier of the second floor kind of being redone. That is in 1906. That is when the scale is removed and the second floor is made largely into what we know it as today, where the temporary exhibit space is that would have been a large drafting room, a number of other offices, where our library is. Several of the cabinets inside of it were made during those engineering days and remain from that. The canal is going to be, once the barge canal replaces it in 1918, it holds on for a few more years in Syracuse for local traffic. But in 1923, the canal is drained and filled in. Erie Boulevard will open a few years later. The weigh chamber, meanwhile, is turned into a parking lot for a few years for the employees of the building. But in 1828, the weigh chamber will be transformed into office space. So concrete walls will be built between the pillars, kind of blocking it off from view. Interesting story is recounted of how Guy W. Pink, who was a charge of that section of the canal at the time, he kept trying to get the weigh chamber converted into office space. State wouldn't authorize money, so he asked for funding for 5 new workboats. But then those workboats evidently weren't needed. But you know what was needed? Walls for the weigh chamber. So that money got reappropriated there. So that's what the Weighlock Building serves as for many years, as this kind of office space for a while. A number of ideas are floated of what to do with this space. Some call for the Weighlock Building to be torn down, turned into a parking lot. An elevated railroad is proposed in Syracuse that would have passed right through where the Weighlock Building stood. That doesn't succeed, but really the biggest comes in the 1950s with the Interstate Highway Act. Maybe aware, Syracuse has 2 major interstate highways running right through it now, I-81 and I-690. They both run almost directly next to the museum. The plan was that an off-ramp, I believe, would have gone through what is now the Weighlock and City Hall, tearing both down. This was part of a much larger urban, quote-unquote, urban renewal project that was kind of planned with I-81. Tragically, the 15th Ward of Syracuse, it's a predominantly Black neighborhood. 8 out of 9 Black Syracuse residents lived in that section of the city, just a few blocks south of the Weighlock Building. That was completely destroyed, and thousands of families were displaced despite protests by them. However, a few blocks north, other protests simultaneously were occurring by the Junior League of Syracuse and the Canal Society of New York to save the Weighlock Building, which were successful. Ultimately, it looked like they weren't at first, looked like they might not have been. In 1958, the Hughes-Chase bill was passed by the New York State Legislature, which would have saved the Weighlock Building. However, it was vetoed by then Governor Harriman. However, in 1962, a deal was reached between the state and Onondaga County, selling the Weighlock Building for $1 to Onondaga County on the premise that it remain an Erie Canal Museum in perpetuity. So thus was formed the Erie Canal Museum in 1962. I like to point out that we have actually been a museum now much longer than the building was a Weighlock. So that is, yeah, the rest is history. A museum is born, and yeah, we've been telling Erie Canal stories ever since. So, hope that wasn't too long. Any questions? Or, Craig, you want to tell me all the things I got wrong? So,
Derek, thank you very much. And you know, if Craig wants to chime in, then I'll allow for that. And I will point out too, while people may be formulating some questions, put up in the chat, or you know, have some comments. I posted a few of the links to the Erie Canal Museum website, the Facebook page, in the chat as well. And I see that Frank has eriecanal.org about the Syracuse Weighlock and other Weighlock buildings. Those links will all be also added to this in the description when it gets posted to YouTube at some point in the next couple days when I have time. So if anybody has any questions, put them in there. And Craig, if you feel like inserting some additional information, pointing out some glaring omissions, just send me a quick note and I'll unmute you. But I was going to put...
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to plug something. When I got into what I was talking about with the I-81, part of the reason I was invited here was because our theme for the year is infrastructure. We just opened up our Infrastructure of Empire exhibit, which looks a lot at the building of the canal, canal features, but also kind of how 81, its story parallels in a lot of ways the canal. So I just encourage you, come check that out. You can see it where the scale used to be. So if that's not enticing, I don't know what is.
I'm glad you beat me to the question where I was gonna be like, hey, don't you have this new exhibit? And isn't that why this is the topic? But you were right there, so that's perfect. I'd gone through, you addressed plenty of the things that I would have had questions about, so I didn't really formulate any of my own questions. But I thought it was interesting going through and hearing some of the dollar amounts, and then if you believe online inflation calculators, the building itself for the Weighlock comes out to something like $303,000 today, which everyone would know was not a reasonable actual number to build that building if you were to do it today in downtown Syracuse.
Well, that's why I'm suspicious of the $80 for the former Weighlock property. Again, if you believe the online inflation calculators, it's like $2,000 for this piece of downtown real estate. Doesn't seem to check out to me, really. But.
Yeah, that is a prime spot. And you had mentioned earlier that Goose Island seemed like a weird kind of place for those. And the only thing that was going through my head is it probably had something to do with somebody got some money out of the reason why it was located there. But graft and corruption being the center of government, and not that I would be bitter or skewed in any way toward making those assumptions.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to point out that you could actually see Goose Island in one of the pictures I showed, but when they enlarge the canal, Goose Island pretty much disappears. It's there for some change bridges, essentially. But yeah, no, it's a weird location. Those first three.
And the only thing I put down on my little notes here that I put a question mark next to really isn't necessarily something I feel like is a real question. But you had mentioned the different sections of the canal and that those engineers would be located on the second floor. that there was a central, middle, and eastern section. And I think, well, central means middle to me.
I meant to say Western, excuse me.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. That
I
makes
also-
much more sense.
Yes, I forgot an interesting bit, since I was talking about how the engineering position was kind of insulated from political patronage, but not entirely, especially the upper levels. I really enjoyed learning about the Richmond family a bit, who would have worked in the Weighlock at points. They clearly just named their oldest son after whoever was paying their bills. There's Van Rensselaer Richmond, and then his son is Dennison Richmond, and Dennison is the last name of a prominent member in the Canal Ring. So that was fun.
Nice.
That.
Well, that's a good way to keep the funds flowing, and you make a good point about the engineering, even and some of the research I had done with O.L. Holly, being the state engineer in the 1830s, that he was a newspaper man and had no real formal background in any sort of engineering, but he happened to be the state engineer or surveyor, and that I'm sure has a lot to do with him having been the editor in Troy at the newspapers. But so I'm not seeing what's that?
Oh, I was going to say there's another historian, I think it was Franklin Chase, who was the president of OHA of the Onondaga Historic Association in the 1920s. He talked about how Syracuse specifically was like the perfect spot for political graft because it had so many canal functions, but also the salt industry was heavily regulated by the state. So that had a number of positions you could appoint as well. So that was pretty fun. But you were going to say?
Yeah, no, you make a good point. You know, anytime there's a regulated industry, there's a lot of people with their hands in that political cookie jar.
Right.
So
Civil service exams don't exist yet.
And today, well, and now I won't comment about civil service exams today. And you gave a shout out to Watervliet, West Troy, Weighlock, and Square Whipple, and you talked about some instances in the Weighlock itself. Kind of reminded me of a few things near 23rd Street with the locks there and some drowning episodes. So it kind of makes me wonder if the Syracuse Weighlock, as busy as it was, happened to be a bit more safe than some of the other locks in the system.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people at the building, which I think probably is helpful rather than like one or two lock tenders. But we do have another account of a child drowning in the canal right outside of the lock, but it wasn't as part of the canal operations or anything. Yeah, I don't know if it was safer or anything.
Well, on
Only
that note, on that uplifting bit of history, we're bumping into 8:10 p.m. and I want to thank you very much. I'm not seeing any questions come in. We have a few comments about how it's all good and thank you, and I can express the great appreciation I have from Schoharie Crossing to the Erie Canal Museum and you specifically, Derrick, for this great presentation. Craig Williams for the research that helped you out as well, but also your diligence and your own research and putting together this information, the presentation. And if you don't mind my asking, when you do lose your leg, what's the dog's name?
Harper.
All right.
Let her get her cameo for Folk One. Say hi, Harper. Yep.
Very good. All right, I'll be sure to send you a chunk of wood that you can start carving your leg out of.
Yeah, sounds good.
Very nice. And thank you very much, Derrick. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Dave from Schoharie Crossing. You've been a fantastic audience. We're signing off for the last of our third Thursday. Appreciate it. Everyone be well.
Yep. See you later.